This is Becoming Inclusive from the Kaleidoscope Group, where we're thinking differently about diversity, equity, and inclusion for more empowered people at work. We're committed to real change, and that begins with real conversations. Welcome in.
I'm Reggie Ponder, and welcome to another edition, another episode of Becoming Inclusive. I'm here with my co-host, Catherine Potts. Hey, Kat, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. Hey, everyone.
And then we might as well say we're here with our other co-host, Brian Johnson.
Yeah.
Hey, Brian, how are you?
Good.
It's always good to talk to you. And the reason I say our other co-host is that, Brian, when we get together to talk, the three of us, we end up talking about 15 different things. And you're laughing. What's your thought on what I'm trying to say here, Brian?
Yeah, it's like there's so it's just like we're sitting at the dining room table, right? Throwing different ideas back and forth, and we get some great stuff, and we don't even push record yet.
That's true,
and that's good. That's a good thing. It's this is how people operate. There's a lot of stuff to talk about. If you are willing to be honest and have a real conversation, talk about real stuff, it can go on and on and on.
Well, I love the fact that you just said have a real conversation, because one of the real conversations we have is from a leadership perspective. Leaders a lot of times look at their workers as they're just not getting it. They're not doing it. But then their workers look at the leaders and be like, they're just not getting it. They're just not doing it. And that occurs in our DE&I space, yes?
Yes, absolutely. It's, I think sometimes we forget. Well, a lot of times with our experiences, you're dealing with companies a lot of time. And number one, to remember that having a company is difficult. Having a small company succeed is difficult, especially in COVID time, especially, post-recession, maybe another recession coming. I mean, all these things that play, the labor shortage now we're dealing with. Having a small company that's successful is very difficult. Having a large company that's successful is even more difficult. So we have to remember, whoever put the company together, that's a difficult job, and you have to be responsible for everything. Yes, the wins, but you're responsible for all the losses also. And that can be a tough spot to be in. So I'm sorry, go ahead, Rich.
It's really interesting that you say that, because, we've talked sports. You're our sports guy. Is that the owners or the managers a lot of times blame the players, and then the players a lot of time will blame the owners. Sure. And you're saying that the owners really have to take responsibility, culpability, and in this case, the owners of the company have to say, we have these wins, and when I run out to talk about what we did last quarter, I can talk about those wins, but I also have to own up to these losses or these difficulties or these challenges that they're experiencing, and we're talking specifically in the area of DE&I.
Sure. Yeah, and sports is a great analogy with this, right? It's easy to just beat up the owner behind the scenes because they're making money and they can afford this and they should have bought that guy, and this dude over here was even better. We should have got him. And they spent money on that guy, but it didn't work out. So it's easy because they're not, front and center. We don't see them every day. And in the DE&I space, it's very similar, because a lot of times people who start their own companies or create companies, as they're trying to survive, they're going to hire people that are like them. People that they know, people that are in their circle, people who look at things similarly to them, have similar skill sets, so they can keep this thing afloat. And then boom, when the company explodes, they look back on the last 10 years and say, why do we all look the same? We're not a racist organization. Mm-hmm. Why do we all look the same? Well, it's because you were trying to survive in an organization, and with your organization, you tend to hire people who your circle is only so big. And so you did the best you could. And now you find later on in 2022 that you are getting some criticism because your environment doesn't have enough of this person or this gender or that geographic location represented. So it's tough. So I think it's important for us in the DE&I space, especially folks that are DE&I directors that are working within companies. We come in and we're gone. But people who are working within the corporate structure, they need to have a little more patience with leaders, right? Mm-hmm. We tend to be, it's very easy to work with people who get DEI. very easy to work with people who understand inclusivity and has been a part of them their whole lives. But it's more difficult when you get, and oftentimes it's the leaders or the ownership of the company that have not grown up that way, that are not comfortable with certain terms, that are getting fed a whole bunch of misinformation that tends to demonize anything around DE&I as if someone is going to lose and someone's going to win. So we need to address that, understand that when you're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, everybody wins. Everybody's included. Everybody has a role, and that doesn't get out most of the time.
Like for me, the three major buckets that, really sort of stand out with what you're saying, Brian, is like perception, survival, and then the journey itself. Okay. So it's like perception of everybody's role, right? Who's accountable? Whose fault is it? And the role that plays into getting to where you're trying to get to from a DEI lens, right? And then there's survival. We had to consider like, okay, how did we get here? Was it just survival? It wasn't intentional, right? We weren't trying to only be a bunch of white dudes running the company, but we have to also, to your point, be patient that up until maybe right now, we were just trying to survive. And this is what survival looks like. And then the journey aspect, right? Where it's like, that gives people hope, like we're on this journey to continuously evolve. Like we're not just sort of, this has been a journey, it's still evolving. There's room for change, but there has to be patience along that journey. Those are kind of the three things that like really stuck out for me about what you were saying in regards to how it can look from a leadership versus just an employee standpoint, and how DEI, is like weaved into all that when you kind of start those initiatives.
Yeah, sure. And to add to that, Kat, really good points. I like the three buckets. To add to that, with D&I work, it doesn't end. There's no victory lap you're going to get once you cross that finish line. There's no finish line to get to. Secondly, you're not going to have the immediate feedback, right? Or you get immediate feedback, but you won't get the immediate declaration that we've gotten there. And that's what, we're a data-driven society. Which is great. We're learning so much more, and we're so much more efficient, and we get so much more info when we're looking at the data. But we have to remember constantly that the human factor comes in play, right? What formula is going to tell me that my marriage is healthy? What formula is going to tell me that my kids are in the right school for their personality, for what they want to do? What formula is going to tell me that I enjoy working with Kat and Reggie? What formula is going to do that, right? We don't want to just go to Reggie every time and ask him, hey, we doing okay hanging out with you, Reggie? That doesn't really help us. We need to really be able to evaluate that for ourselves. And there's no data formula for that. And so we spend a lot of time having to get that across to people, is that, data is great, but it doesn't tell you everything.
I love that, and that's probably our problem, Brian, is that's probably going to be another conversation too. Just talking about the qualitative and the quantitative of DE&I. That whole discussion of understanding that it's just not about the numbers is really important, and I'm glad that you pointed that out. I do want to go back to this thing because you said that. We inside the organization need to be a little bit more patient. And so I suspect you're talking about middle managers, people in BRGs or ERGs, that those folks need to be a little bit patient because, again, if you don't know about DE&I or didn't get raised that way and don't really believe it and don't even believe in it, it may take a while for you to get there. But I'm going to play the person who's in that BRG or ERG. How patient should I be?
I'm going to say, yeah, right. We're living now in a world too, where everybody's tired of being patient.
That's right. And that's both great points. Absolutely. And you have to consider it. And that if we were talking to the leaders have to be patient too and understand you're going to get a lot of flack, right? It's just, we are in a society where we want immediate satisfaction. We're also in a society, because of ERGs and BRGs, we're able to speak to power quickly. Social media, we're able to speak to power quickly. Criticisms and compliments get thrown around in seconds around the world. So the company's going to hear it. They have to be a little more thicker skin, if you will, when they hear that stuff. But it can't just be all one way. We in the BRGs and the ERGs and we in the company, we have to have some thicker skin too. Say, hey, we understand where you're at. as long as the organization is sincerely working on it and continuing to do that and showing proof of being able to work on it, it's different if, Reggie, we're going to give you the Heisman and say, hey, Reggie, just sit there and be quiet, be in your BRG, and we'll just pretend like we're doing something. And then we've hired no consultants. We have no plan. We have nothing to show to you at our annual meeting to show you what progress is being made. Okay, then patience goes out the door. However, if the organization is doing constructive things, is really forcing real conversation, is hiring expertise outside of the norm, is putting in policies and procedures that are identified, that are more helpful for the nursing mother, more helpful for the husband that is supporting the mother that just had a baby, more helpful for the person who may be vegetarian or may not eat pork because of their religious background. That all these things, if there's things being put in place like that, that proves that they're really staying to the words, that they're going to evolve and make this place better, then you have to be a little more patient with that.
You made a point a little earlier, Brian, about that there's really no finish line. And that's really, really frustrating. That's frustrating for the people who are within the organization and at ERG, BRG. And that's very, very frustrating for the owner and the leader of the company, because I have kids, and we would take these trips across the country, and that whole adage of them asking, "Are we there yet?"
Sure.
Happened all the time. No, we're not there yet. We're stopping, but we're not there. We're gonna get a break, and I think that's how people kind of see the DE&I journey. Is like, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And then you stopped. Why are we stopping? It's so frustrating, and it's frustrating on both sides.
That's right.
Well, and I wonder too, though, the acknowledgement around, like, I think sometimes too, in that place of like frustration around patients, oftentimes it's forgotten how far we've actually come. And that's sometimes, and I know instant gratification, right? Everyone wants it right now. They don't think it's fast enough, whatever, whether it's personal or professional, like definitely room for that. But I also think that there has to be acknowledgement, like, look where we are. I mean, if there's a company that's been around for 50 years and they just started a DEI initiative, it could take another decade for them to get to where you think. We're talking about 50 years of a culture.
Right.
To think that, in 1 or 2 years or in 6 months, there's going to be this huge shift, that's like very impossible.
Right. Yeah. And it's both great points. And I would add to that, in that we also have to define what patience is. Right. I neglected to define what I mean by patience when I said we need to be patient. I like the idea of being aggressively patient. So I didn't say anything about stop voicing your opinion. I didn't say anything about stop pushing the envelope. I didn't say anything about stopping what you're doing. But to Kat's point, the expectation of when you're going to see this come to fruition, had to be realistic about it, right? There's a reason, and I say this, I feel like I say this every time I come on here. If this was easy, we wouldn't have racism for the last 400 years. Right? We've had racism and sexism, sexual harassment. Women are still being brutalized across the world. And it couldn't, these simple things are not fixed. So to expect them to therefore be fixed within your organization that is definitely a microcosm of the rest of the world is a little bit unrealistic. So let's not bring our baggage to our workplace and expect all these things to happen when you want them to happen. They need to happen and need to be pushed. Yes. Push. Yes. Vocalize. But at the end of the day, you also have to be realistic to both your points.
You said, let's not bring our baggage. But what I really take from you when you say aggressively have aggressive patience is you might bring some of that baggage. You're just saying you don't have to take everything out of the luggage.
Great point. I was overly general, and yours.
No, that's what I was getting from it. I didn't know if that's what you were saying, but that's what I got from it is that we still need to be aggressive and say, just because it's not fixed in society doesn't mean that we don't need to fix it. And I'm now speaking from the CEO's perspective. And the CEO needs to be aggressive. She needs to be able to look at her organization and say, we can do better and we will do better.
That's right. And the aggressiveness, the aggressiveness is why change happens. It's not going to happen by chance. It's not going to happen because people feel like, well, we just need to be nicer. It happens because they are forced to change. So, and again, I should have prefaced that to begin with. Being patient, realistic does not mean slowing down, does not mean, it's just really for your own health and your own mental health of where your expectations are. You can still push, you can still do everything, hold the company accountable. Companies are forced now to speak out on issues, right? Because they are citizens of our country and other countries as well. They can't just sit on the sidelines and just reap the benefits of being within our society. You got to participate and can't just manipulate people to buy more stuff. You got to, if you're going to be in the society and using marketing materials, you also have to contribute to the conversation because the corporate voice is very strong. So it's about mentally, are we going to be able to last long term, even though we're pushing every single day? So, but great point. Thanks for the clarification.
And also, I think what does it look like for the leader, right? Because the leader too can ask for patience, but the leader also needs to not slow down, right? Like, because it can't be like, oh, I'm juggling 10 million things. I'm doing we get that. Like, that's all a part of owning a business. So that we understand. But I think there's also a role where a leader can't hold on to this, the patience where it's almost weaponized in a way. I'll just be patient with me, just be patient. Because, he or she or they don't want to do what they have to do in order to get things rolling, or they're overwhelmed, etc.
And that's a great point, because most of the businesses have been taking advantage of the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. Oh, this long-term project. Therefore, let's not do anything about it for another year. Oh, we have other things that are more important. Oh, so you're right. Leadership of organizations cannot take advantage of the fact that this is long-term. They have to show what they're doing, right? They have to show proof that day to day, they are making this a part of the ether of the organization. Not that it's a project far off down the road. And that's real stuff. I mean, almost every organization would probably be guilty relatively of trying to figure out where DEI fits, and is this the right year, or is this the right time or right month? And with George Floyd, boom, that was put front and center, and all the other priorities were they all kind of melded together, where DEI became important and very. Well,
you've made a really big point, and I'll let you go, Reggie, but I just want to point this out where you said companies trying to figure out where DEI fits, which is so interesting, because it's right. DEI is not like a Lego, right? It doesn't really fit. It's a part of the culture of your company. And it's even that mindset, right? Where it's where do we stick this activity in, right? Is where you're already going to probably pushing yourself back on your timeline, because you're trying to literally the word fitting it into a puzzle piece, versus this is just a part of our culture, a part of our company, not something that needs to be squeezed between other initiatives and other things going on for us to meet our goals for the end of the year, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's probably one of our top priorities or top hurdles to get over.
Yep.
Is fighting the idea from an organization that they're trying to find a place to fit, but not realizing that this fits everywhere. It's the glue. Yeah. It's the glue that attaches to everywhere. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Reggie, if you want to.
Yeah, sorry, Reg.
I'm really glad of all the points that both of you are bringing up. It's so great to talk about what both sides need to do, though. Sure. And I like the fact that you're doing that, Brian, because hopefully the people within the organization in these ERGs and BRGs are saying, okay, I have a responsibility to be aggressive, as you just said. Mm-hmm. I also have a responsibility to be patient. And that's where you put the two together, aggressively patient.
Sure.
Then we flip it to the CEO. And Kat, I love what you just said in terms of I have a responsibility to be aggressive, also to be patient with the people who are working with me, but to not use that patience as a ruse to not do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And it just resonates with me so well. And it kind of comes back to something, Brian, I think in a prior discussion you talked to us about, is that this all revolves around trust. Is that at the end of the day, if I trust that the CEO is that she is trying to do something and she's communicating with me in a way that I believe is genuine, then I might have some patience. I still might be aggressive, like, come on, let's get this done. But I may have some patience because I'm trusting that there's a journey, that there's an effort, that there's some movement. On the flip side, if I'm communicating well, hopefully I will trust when those people who are bringing up the issues, they're bringing up those issues earnestly. They're bringing up those issues timely. They're not bringing up those issues to embarrass me, embarrass the company, to cause us problems and angst, that in the end, we're all hopefully working toward the same goal, to have a better company, which means better people and better work.
Yeah. And great point. And if I could add something to that, is that another big hurdle that we face, right? One is getting them to figure out where DEI fits and that whole language. But also, to your point, Reggie, it is being able to make them understand that they have to grow, right? And the leaders have to grow. Oftentimes with when consultants come in and there's educational things that go on or whatever goes on, oftentimes leaders will say, yeah, let's have them do that. Yeah, let's have everybody below me do that. And you can't do that because leaders are just as responsible for that organization, that culture, even more so because they set the standard, they set the expectation. So it's really important that there's a humility amongst the leaders to be able to say, I need to grow here too. Even though I don't really know what this is, I need to take it upon myself to learn. And that's about professional development, right? You do professional development all the time as a leader, and DEI has to be a part of that.
You mentioned something, excuse me, Kat, just to say, you mentioned something about that the resistance to DE&I might be more practical than philosophical. Can you explain what you mean by that?
You said to me or to Kat?
You, Brian. You had mentioned then something that we kind of went back and forth on through email, is that DE&I, the resistance to DE&I might be more practical than philosophical.
Yeah, I think so. I think, when you own a company, that's your life. Everything, you live and die by the ups and downs of the organization, right? So practically, you have to think everything into account. Remember, this may be 20 years of experience of doing things one way. And now you're asking them to do something a different way. And we as human beings, a lot of times, sometimes we don't function well when there's change. Some of us don't. So there is a little resistance to that. So we need to come across it. But philosophically, there is no organization that doesn't want people to get together and to work well together. There's no organization that doesn't want people to stay long term, especially now in our employment crisis. There's no organization that doesn't want you to be happy here, that doesn't want you to stay here, that doesn't want you to feel good about your work and all that the time and effort you put into it to really be satisfied with you being there. So that's what we talked about. It's not philosophy, right? It's that practically, how do we get this done? What is the best way for this organization to get this DEI effort executed and make it worth the time and effort? Because it's a lot of work, it's a lot of time, it's a lot of money. So how do we do that best for the organization and still survive as an organization and continue to thrive?
And it makes me think too, if you're pushing like the philosophical mindset, right, that can seem kind of idealistic, which can then sort of create these like expectations that are unrealistic around like how quickly we're going to get there. Because in an ideal world, right, there would be all the diversity, the inclusion, everything would be equitable, like, and idealistic and philosophy go hand in hand. You know what I mean? So I feel like that's where getting more to like a practical space seems a little bit more attainable. And then there's probably a little bit more room for patience in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Reggie, you were smiling when I said that. Did I just say something awesome?
You actually did. and I don't want to be on record saying that on this podcast. So no, Kat, I like that. I like the fact that I just like I like the fact that Brian brings up this thing about practical and philosophical. I haven't thought about it in that way. Is that I thought about it about resistance versus acceptance. That's really how I've always kind of looked at it. Why are you resisting? What's the problem? Why can't you just accept this? So this whole practical versus philosophical is really an interesting one. And I just felt that your take on it was
I think that's an awesome take on it. I've never really thought about it that way either.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And one last thing, as far as things that are difficult to get across to organizations, we really try to get organizations to promote what they're doing internally, to let people know the meetings that they're having, the ideas that we're throwing around, the possibilities of looking at 3 different options or whatever for being more inclusive, right? For new policies. Share that internally, because a lot of organizations, they don't want to come across as bragging or come across as wanting to get credit for doing something, blah, blah, blah. You got to get over that, because the way you're going to get street cred from the ERGs, the BRGs, and from people who are tired, as you pointed out, Reggie, who are tired of being patient. The way you get street cred with those folks, which is the majority of folks, is that you let them know what you're doing. You show them the process that you're going through. There's a lot of footwork that we do with organizations before anybody else even finds out about it. There's hours and hours and hours. Let people know that, promote that, show them the process. Be humble enough to say, you know what, we don't know all the answers yet, but here's what we're doing. Here's how we're going about it. We're trying to make this for 2023 or 2022. We're trying to take it to a whole different level. And here's proof of that. So leaders, listen up.
Man, so I have one other question before we have to end this one. We'll just have our co-host Brian Johnson back on. Is that, Brian, this whole issue of one side feeling one way and the other side feeling the other way. How do you, we talked about communication, and you're talking about maybe advertising, but how do you really close that gap? Because the outcome for each is, they're looking at it differently, even though the outcome is the same, a better workplace for everyone. That's the overall outcome. But the employees are looking at it as, I'll be more comfortable and be able to do a better job. The owners or CEO suite looking at it, they're thinking, well, we'll make more money. While both are true, the fact that you're coming at it differently, does it impact how effective we might be in the end?
Yeah, great question. I mean, that's the $1 million question. That's a really tough divide to get across, right? I think it's and I think it's most important to really have those two married together, is to really have real conversations and communicate more and talk really in simple terms, right? People talk about, politically we're divided across the country. Well, the political conversation doesn't come until we get to know each other. You know, if Reggie and I are getting to know each other for the first time, or Kat and I, you know, we're talking about where you grew up, you know, what kind of experience you had in college, or even if you didn't go to college, or your kids, the personality traits of your kids, or whatever, where you live, how you feel about what's going on there, whatever it may be. There's so many ingredients before we jump to the complicated issues, right? Mm-hmm. Abortion's been on the books and been something our society has debated over and over again, nationally and internationally, quite frankly, for decades and decades and decades and decades. The racial piece, right? We're not ready to have those conversations until we build a relationship first. So I think, in short, we need to build relationships, build something that is worthy of being able to build other things upon them, and be able to handle heavier conversations, be able to handle heavier things. So that would be my response to your the predicament that you bring up. That is very real.
Kat?
I mean, for me, what Brian's talking about is just like the root of human connection, right? Like if you're trying to connect with someone, whether it's professionally or personally, right? Like you don't start off like, how do you feel about abortion? Like on a first date even, right? Like maybe for some, but typically you're not, it's like, you're just trying to get to know someone on this surface level to then like pull back layers, right? To then be able to feel comfortable or safe in that space to have those deeper conversations where you don't feel like what you're saying is going to be heavily judged or used against you. I mean, it honestly kind of makes me think a little back to the episodes with like Trisha and Jerry Jones around like psychological safety. I mean, that's a part of what you're talking about too, Brian, is like getting people to that space, but it's like you can't do it right off the cuff. Like there's so many things that you want to talk to someone, get to know someone before getting that deep, or even where getting that deep is effective or impactful. Because also me better knowing who you are, Brian, or knowing who you are, Reggie, knowing who you are better at your core, I'm probably going to be more like perceptive to what you're saying if I feel like I really know who you are versus someone off the street that's just like, this is how I feel and you think you're wrong and, and all that stuff. Like that human connection is the root, I think, for sustainable change when you're trying to implement any initiative at a company level and outside of that.
Brian, I see you about to say something. Go ahead.
So true. I mean, so a real practical example, right? A couple, and this has happened to me recently and always happens, right? Somebody that, so I have a couple of different situations. So one brother I have, we completely are in polar opposites politically, but we never talk about that, right? We just talk about his kids and whatever other issues. And we talk about how we grew up, so on and so forth. So we really talk about other stuff. And the political stuff never comes into play in our relationship if we're disciplined about it. Same type of situation to a stranger. I had the same situation come up with a stranger to where, you know, I heard the hot words, right? The hot takes. And so I realized early on, okay, we see the world completely differently. So I just focused on the here and now and focused on both of us trying to get this thing together, get this thing solved. We're talking about different things and just focusing on that and building on the little stuff. Little is not the right word, but building on other stuff instead of the big stuff. To your point, Kat, the human connection, there's so much value there. We have so much more in common than we think. And it's so much more enjoyable than talking about the big things as fast as we can.
Wow, I love that, and I love what I'm going to take away from this conversation, particularly, Brian, is the term aggressively patient. I think you need to go ahead and coin that. I love it. I am Reggie Ponder. This is Becoming Inclusive. That's my co-host, Catherine Potts, and that's our other co-host, Brian Johnson. We are so happy that you spent a little time with us, and we hope to see you next time.
And don't forget, everyone, subscribe, share, like, let us know what you like, let us know what you don't like. Your feedback is very much appreciated.
Yeah, what she said. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us, and a special thanks to our subscribers. Consider becoming one today. Becoming Inclusive is presented by the Kaleidoscope Group, your full-service diversity, equity, and inclusion partner serving clients worldwide. Learn more and continue the conversation at kgdiversity.com.